There are, of course, specific activities or specific conduct which might jeopardize the protection which IHL grants to health professionals or health facilities. So, of course, the main problem is represented by circumstances in which the impartial and humanitarian nature of the health facility or of the health professional is compromised. For instance, if they're used, as I was saying before, to in support of military action of one or the other party. If you remember, for instance, during the last Gaza war, the Israeli Defense Forces were launching attacks against hospitals in the Gaza Strip, claiming that they were used to, launch mortar shells against Israeli territory. So in this case, of course, since the health facility has allegedly been used for military personnel, it loses its protected status. In the same vein, also using ambulances to transport fighters or military material is prohibited, and it would entail the loss of protection for these facilities or these units. This doesn't mean, however, that in the case of hospitals, for instance, the fact that they have been used for military purposes deprives the hospital and also those who are inside the hospital of any sort of protection, which means that the party against whom attacks have been launched from the hospital can obviously target the hospital, but the party would need to respect the rules of IHL, which try to minimize the effect of hostilities on protected persons. So, for instance, they would need to make sure that the attack is actually necessary, so that the health facilities are still used to further military in support of military action. They would also to make sure that the attack is proportionate, so that the possible collateral damage is not disproportionate with respect to the expected military advantage they expect to gain from launching that specific attack. So, in brief terms, they must do all which is possible to minimize the damage to the protected individuals that are hosted by the hospital. Moreover, as I said, when it comes to hospitals and medical units, a specific warning must be given before launching an attack, and only after the warning has gone unheeded can the attack actually be launched against those sort of facilities. Of course, these sort of practices are, let's say, very damaging to the normal running of medical business during armed conflict, because of course they jeopardize, they undermine the trust that belligerents put in organizations providing health assistance, and of course as a result they might lead to the introduction of restrictions and controls on the operations of medical personnel. So IHL foresees, for instance, that the belligerent parties can search ambulances, can search vehicles which are used to transport wounded or sick. And of course, if there is a pattern of disregard of the obligation to only to transport sick and wounded and not to transport means that can be used in the conflict, these controls might intensify. And this, of course, could lead to a slowing down of medical operations and hence make them less effective. There have been surveys over the last few years consulting both armies and also armed groups, and all of these, or many of these actors have pointed to the fact that, for instance, misusing the Red Cross or Red Crescent emblem has in the past undermined, as I said, the trust between the parties to the conflict, and has led to make those units, those facilities, the objects of direct attack. So instead of being spared and protected, they were actually chosen and elected as being specific privileged targets. It is also important to say, and this is one of the big dilemmas that health professionals face nowadays, that they might be perceived to be to have lost their neutrality if they are witnessed to, or if they are seen as siding with one or the other party to the conflict. And this, of course, might become a problem because, on one hand, the parties to the conflict, as we said, have a duty to respect and protect those health professionals or relief workers. And many times the only way they can do it is by providing them with armed escort. On the other hand, medical personnel and relief personnel in general might not want to be seen as associated with any sort of armed groups. So what do you do when you're in such a situation where you actually need protection because the situation is very volatile and there are armed groups or bandits or other criminals roaming around the area? But on the other hand, you don't want to be seen as associated with any sort of security force, so to say. So this is one of the big dilemmas with which the health professionals are nowadays, let's say, struggling.